Welcome to Drawing Vector Graphics Laboratory. I love reading, and I love reading about history specifically. And one of my favorite books is one titled The American President. If you haven't checked it out, make sure to check it out. All kinds of cool stories in there. But that was the inspiration for this movie. So we're going to create a vector-based illustration of former President Theodore Roosevelt, also known as Teddy Roosevelt. And he was a very colorful character. So let's jump into this and I'll show you how I pull off this specific style. It's one of the fun styles I like to work in. And it all is derived from really good kind of high contrast photographic reference. And we're going to start with this source image of Teddy Roosevelt. And man, talk about having a nice pair of chompers on him. It's like, wow. But this is going to be fun to work with. And so what I do is I start with the source photograph, and this has some good contrast to it, but we really need to punch it out. So I always make a copy so I can go back to my source at any time. And here I'll just go to adjustment, I'll go to levels, and I'll just start blowing things out just to improve that overall contrast and darken the shadow areas just to create a more dramatic source to draw from. Something like this. This all has to do with your taste and kind of what you're trying to achieve. But this is what I'll do to adjust a photograph until I get a nice base as shown here with my contrast. Now, some areas of a photo are going to be contrasted better at certain settings than other ones. So I'll get an overall look and feel like this, but then I'll go in and in this case, I'll paint out the background just so it's just isolated on him. And then I'll go back to my source photograph like this, and I'll say, you know, on this image, his hair is kind of blown out a little too much. I want a little more detail there. And so I'll go back to a source image like this. I'll grab the lasso tool, and this doesn't have to be perfect. I'll just make a quick and dirty selection kind of at the top of his hair like this, just to isolate that. And I'll go ahead and go to image and adjustments and levels. And I'll just focus on adjusting the hair just to get it looking the way I want, like this. I'll click OK, and then I'll go Command J, and that'll make a selection of just the hair, and I'll move it up like this. So I get a better representation. Actually, we can put it below the whiteout like that. And that looks better than the original hair I had. It defines his hairline a little better. So I use that methodology to improve his chin. So I'll copy in a chin. Maybe it's an improvement on his nose and mustache to give me illusion at that detailing. Maybe I want his eyes to pop a little better behind his glasses, and of course, again, the hair. So that's how I'll create what I call idealistic reference. And I'll save this out as a TIFF image and bring it into Illustrator, or actually save this out as a TIFF image, and then I'll print it out and I'll draw from it. This will be guiding my drawing effort. So now let's go ahead and switch to Illustrator, and I'll walk through the entire process of how we move from this and create our vector-based artwork. So we had our source photograph of Teddy Roosevelt as shown here. We created a nice high contrast version of it using Photoshop to create idealistic reference. And now it's at this point that I'll print it out and go to analog. So we're not in Illustrator when we do this. I'll just use my light pad. It's just a thin little half-inch tall light table of sorts. I'll place that printout on top of it, put tracing paper on top of it. Then I'll just start to draw out the shapes associated with the photo. So once again, I'm using the high contrast reference we made, and then on top of it, I'm just simply drawing out my shape. So if we zoom in on this, you can see that on his eye, you have different shapes, but I just want to deduce those down, use deductive reasoning to look at those shapes, analyze them, and then create simple forms based off of that photographic reference. It doesn't align exactly with the photo. It's capturing the essence of that shape and simplifying it down into an iconic form, into a simpler shape that represents it, is proportionate to it, but it doesn't have to be identical to it, if that makes sense. So there's a lot of forgiveness with this style, but it's how you create the shape and form. And as I'm drawing, I'm thinking about the vector shapes I want to create. So this is how I'll draw out based off of photographic reference, and I'll let it guide me. But I take artistic license anywhere I can to make it communicate better. For instance, on the top of his hairline, as it comes down the front of his forehead, the photograph, he didn't have any distinctual like hairs poking out or anything. So I used artistic license to create something that looks like hair, and it represents his hair and the profile of his hairline, but it's not based off of what the photo even shows. But that's okay. That's how this style works. That's how you have to approach it. So on something like this, I'll scan this in, and in this case, we'll go ahead and set it for 20%. And I'll go ahead and lock this layer. And then on the layer above it, I'm going to start building these shapes. So you can see I'm just following along. I'm not doing a lot of guesswork here. I'm just looking at my reference and building that shape that I've already drawn out. So it's not a lot of guesswork at this stage. Now, as I'm building, it can kind of get confusing. So I like to use what's called a temp layer. I'll turn that on, and we'll go ahead and zoom in on his glasses, because these were the part of the illustration that I didn't build with the pen tool. I just used the ellipse tool. So we're going to select those elements that make up the profile of his glasses, and we're going to drag those to the temp layer. And I'm going to go over here and do the same thing for a couple of the shapes over here that make up his glasses as well, like these, and we'll drag those to the temp layer. Now I do that just because it makes focusing on certain detail a lot easier. So right now I have this shape, but you can see where I have my drawing where this glass bends around and it interacts with other shapes to give that illusion of his glasses. So I want to take the shape I need to do that, which is this one, and we'll go ahead and drag that back down. I'll turn off the temp layer, and then I'll use this just to focus on this area of editing it. But I don't want it to cut into any of this area, so we're going to have to use a throwaway shape, kind of like this. And we'll select it with this elliptical shape. We'll intersect it with Pathfinder. I'll select the shape that makes up his head. And so all I'm going to do now is I'm going to remove from shape. Oh, wrong way. I want to unite this like this to form that nice, elegant curve right there. So that's all I'm going to do, and I'm going to continue to work this way. So we'll select this shape, and we'll go ahead and move that down to the layer, turn that back off. And this one, I'm going to go ahead and select this circle. Make sure it's on top, select this, and we're going to punch out of that shape because we want that to give the illusion of that highlight. And then I can take that shape, select this shape, and unite it with this shape to create the rest of that element that goes around. So that's how I'll create these shapes that are more geometric, but everything else in this design, such as his mustache and his teeth and all the other shading that makes up this character profile, was created with the pen tool. So when it's all said and done, we have all the base artwork created like this, and this makes it really easy now to create the base black and white. So if we select all these interior shapes and we go to swatches and we fill those with white, get rid of the outline, select the back, we'll go ahead and fill that with black, get rid of the outline there. You can see it's already coming to shape. Now this is when, at this point, I'll print this out. And after I print it out, I'll go back and I'll reference the photograph that I drew this from and pay attention and look at the shadowing on here, because now I want to create that illusion of depth by simplifying and deducing the shadows and draw those out as well. So I'll print this out and I'll literally draw on it with a pencil to figure out my shading as shown here. So if we select this, I'll knock this down to like 70% and lock the layer. And I'll use the same methodology of building. So I'm going to use this same scan that I placed into Illustrator aligned with the drawing that I had printed out and drew from. And I'll now build all of these shapes. And that leads to the final shading as shown here on this character. So that's how I get to this point. We have the base art, we have the shading in place, and the highlighting is just the base of the artwork itself. Now it's at this point, I want to take this artwork and kind of nest it within a shape, specifically this shape. So what I'm going to do is I've made a copy of the outline of the character that's sitting on top right here. And I'll take a shape like this, and I'm just going to intersect these two like that, just to get that. I'll select this inner circle. I'll clone it, Command-C, Command-F. I'll select the shape we just edited, and I'm going to unite these two shapes in place. And let's go ahead and just create the outline on this. So this is now sitting on top, and all we've done here is created a mask shape to mask our artwork of Teddy Roosevelt inside. So I'll select Teddy, I'll select the mask shape on top, and then we go to Object, Clipping Mask, and we go Make, and that's how I would mask them into a shape. I wouldn't trim the bottom of the art because I might want to use this for something else, so I don't want to destroy the art. Now, at some point, I'll build it clean if I'm delivering this to a client so that it's not masked. It's actually built out clean, exactly as you see visually here. But this is the point we can have start having fun with coloring. Now, this is historic, so I wanted to kind of use a sepia tone type of color format here. But one thing I want to point out is notice this outline here. And this is just creating the more illusion of it being within a shape, poking out of that shape. And all I've done here is I have an outline sitting on top right here. I have the mask underneath it, and then I have an outline on this shape. But I've sandwiched all of these together just to give further that illusion of it being nested into shape. So now we can select everything that's black like this, and we'll go ahead and color it this nice dark brown. We're going to also color all the shading. We'll color this color, and in the background here, I think we're going to make this fill this color like that, and I think that looks pretty good. Now, it's as I'm working like this, as I go along on any given project, I'll look at it for a while, or in this case, I came back the next day, I'm looking at it, and something was bugging me, and I figured out what it was, and that is, I like the thickness of the nesting shape, but I thought the outline around Teddy's head was looking a little thin, and I think that could be beefed up some and improve the readability. So that's what I want to do now, is I want to focus on doing that. So what I do is I isolate this outside shape of Teddy itself, and we'll turn on this layer, but I don't want the top of his head to change. I think that's fine. It's thick enough going down the side. It's just from his ears down that I want to affect. And so I've just created a shape that's using the existing artwork, but just leaves the head out of it. And this is what I'm going to edit. And so I'm going to fill this with brown. I'm going to fill the outline with brown. And on the stroke, I just want to make this thicker. So we'll keep a rounded corner. Right now it's 0.75. I want to go to like 6, like this. And then I'm going to go ahead and cut this. And we're going to go into isolation mode like this. We're now inside this mask, and I have all the artworks selected. So I'm going to paste behind this, Command-B, like that. And you can see how it's added that thickness around that area. And I think that looks a lot better. So that's how I'd visually get it to a point that looks correct. And then, of course, when I'm delivering the final art, I had to expand all my outlines and fuse all the artwork together to make it clean. And in this case, on this design, we locked it up with type that has a historical reference called Rough Riders. Teddy Roosevelt was part of that. It's part of American history. You can look that up if you want to know it more. But on a design like this could be used in a historical context. So maybe it's about having a on-screen graphic for a feature on the Battle of San Juan Hill, which the Rough Riders were part of. And this is how I would pull off a portrait like this in a historic sense. But I've used this style on all kinds of portraits that need to be vector-based for scalability reasons, and this is a great way to pull it off. So this type of illustration is just a fun one to work out. I encourage you to pick a person from history or maybe even pop culture you enjoy and try this methodology out yourself. I think you're going to enjoy it. If you have a question you'd like me to address in a future DVG Lab, just email it to me at questions@dvglab.com. Thank you for watching DVG Lab. And remember, never stop drawing.